And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Live with Yana live stream. And tonight's topic is how to make progress in your Agile career. Thank you for finding some time to join our live discussion today. Please make sure you introduce yourself in the comments. Let us know what you do and join our conversation with your comments and questions. So it's exciting day today in Melbourne because lockdown number 5 is finished here. So if you didn't join us today, I won't hold it against you because you're probably somewhere in a cafe or in the gym. But if you're here and you're new to my live show, I'm Yana Martins, and I've recently started my journey as an IT recruiter. Hence, I've started a new YouTube channel dedicated to IT career in Australia. So tonight, we are going to talk about how to make progress in your Agile career. And Peter is going to share his valuable insights and real life experience when it comes to navigating your career in Agile world. So, world is changing. There is a lot of uncertainty around. I'm sure there's a few of you that, thinking, what's next? What the success career looks like for me. So it's obviously incredibly relevant topic. So make sure you tag the people who need to hear this information and share it with your colleagues and friends. So before I'll pass it over to Peter to introduce himself, I just want to remind you quickly that we're going live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So to watch replays, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, IT Career in Australia. I'm going live every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Melbourne time with various experts from my network talking about all things about IT career, job search, and specifics of IT industry in Australia. So we're going to answer all your questions from all the platforms. Just make sure stay on the topic, we're talking about the Agile organizations today and the progressing your career there. So, and please, so if some active participants maybe even get some surprise at the end of the stream. So that's enough of me. I'm gonna pass it on to Peter to introduce himself, please.
G'day everyone. Thank you, Yana. My name is Peter Lamb and I work for a company called Claritas Consulting, and we do a lot of work around this in the Agile and helping organisations transition to Agile ways of working, as well as working to help drive complex delivery across organisations. So most of our focus is on the bigger departments or on larger organisations, and that's where our focus is. For those of you in the Agile community, you'll know, you might have come across some of the work that we do. So I've worked closely with a company called Tabar that runs all the community conference called Lean Agile Systems Thinking, at last conference, first conference, all these things, as well as meetups, Agile BA and Agile PM, which are free. And we run it and been running some of them since 2013 to share knowledge, to connect people and build a community in Melbourne and more recently across Australia. So definitely come on board. Feel free. There you go. Thank you, Jan. We've got 4,500 members, predominantly based in Melbourne. I'm one of the organisers. Next event we've got that's free is talking about applying systems thinking to Agile delivery with one of my mates called Vinky. So absolutely come on board. It's free. Log on. And most of our meetups are online, so it's absolutely worth coming along and having a listen. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for your introduction. We have a few people joining us. Rajiv is here, watching us from India today. Ali is here as well. Thank you, guys. Guys, also, let us know where you're working at the moment, if you're working in an Agile organization or not as well. So, we get some ideas who's watching us today. So, okay, Peter, I'm going to ask you a really broad question in the beginning. And I guess this question is when we were discussing the topic of our live stream, and I suggested the topic about how to progress your career in IT. You asked me it depends what the progress means. So that's my first question to you, actually. How you actually define, the career progress? What is actually progress in the career for you?
Really great question. And not to be the perennial coach consultant answer, it depends. And what it depends on really is what is of interest to you as an individual. So if I look at some friends and some colleagues that I've worked with over the last couple of years, they've had a range. Progression means lots of different things to some people, right? So some of my friends are just interested in doing what they do and having a really steady stream of fascinating work. So that's what drives them to get excited. There's a whole bunch of people I know who go through the process of doing their work, but go, no, actually, I want to manage bigger things. I want to manage more complex things. I want to work on more complex initiatives and projects and the like. So they tend to grow in that domain. Other people, on the other hand, actually, you really get a kick out of managing, coaching, and supporting other people to grow and transform their skills and capability. And when that happens for them, that's brilliant. So what is the definition of career progress? It kind of ties very strongly back to what you value in what you do, right? And I think and as a result, it makes it really, really hard.
Do you think for some people it's all just about the compensation? You haven't mentioned that topic.
No, look, there is absolutely a strong element there's around compensation. I know lots of people they keep changing jobs to earn more and things like that. There are obviously those who choose to go contracting from a financial perspective because that makes sense to them. And the answer is whatever the answer makes sense to you is what career progression is. Some people I know work in quite, for instance, technical roles who get paid a great deal, right? There are others who prefer to manage people, but I think the trick with work in career is you got to find something that interests you, and I think we'll touch upon this later. But to become good at what you do, it is no longer sufficient to have lots of experience and years doing the work. You've got to be fascinated by what you do, and you've got to constantly get better at what you do, right? And even on here tonight, we've got a global audience, and guess what? It's a globally competitive market. So if you want to play ball and get ahead, you got to keep running. And when you run, all you're doing is keeping up with everybody else around you, right? So in terms of definition of career progress, and I think we'll talk about that. I think it's hard. Or you get, if you don't do the work and you don't do the learning, you don't do all those other aspects, you're going to fall, not that you're going backwards, but you'll fall behind compared to everybody else. So I think, career progress as the world has gotten faster, far more competitive, more and more change and transformation coming, it's pretty hard to keep up, to be honest, nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess before we talk specifically about career in Agile organization, can we talk about the difference between, career paths in, waterfall organization compared to Agile organization? Because, sometimes I feel like traditionally people just, for some people, the career progression sounds like opportunity to manage someone. If I manage to hire someone, and that means I progress in my career. So what's the difference between those career paths now?
Look, I think you'll find that organizations that are more traditionally organized versus those who, and I'll put inverted commas, right, aligned to agile organizational structures are set up a little bit differently, right? And as a result, career progression looks different in both of them. So that's exactly right, the picture that I sort of wanted you to share, if that's all right. But if you look at it from an organization's perspective, on my left is a traditional model where you've got managers, you've got team leaders, you've got people doing work. And what happens is that over time you work and you're very good as an analyst. Over time, you then become a team leader of analyst. Over time, if you keep working hard and progressing, you can become a manager, and you can go up to any level of management following off that linear path, right? And that's quite traditionally what we look at from a management model and a career progression model, where it's actually going up this hierarchy that we look at. And that's what most people are sort of familiar with. If we start to look at the organization on the right, and this is unashamedly taken from the Spotify video that they have on engineering culture part 1, and the Spotify model is one that we talk frequently about, where they kind of separate, where you've got tribes, which are collections of people doing work to drive a particular outcome. You have chapters that go horizontally, which is around, if you like, your people leader side of things. And they have a third element called guilds, which is circled in purple, which talk about common skills and common interests to build capability. Now, on top of the tribe, which you don't necessarily, ties almost directly to either senior exec and senior leadership team. So if you're looking at more traditional organizations on the left, there are lots of layers in the organization to climb. If you look at the agile organization on the right, as demonstrated by something like the Spotify S model, you're finding that there are a lot less layers in management, which then means that the way that you climb your career has to be fundamentally different. And the way you reimagine your career has to be quite different. Now, I'm not saying that the fact that you use a Spotify style model on the right is a demonstration that you are agile. I'm just saying these are the organizational design constructs, two of the most common patterns that you typically see, right? So if you look at the difference between the agile organization or traditional organization and an agile organization, a traditional organization has, team leaders, managers, and things like that. Whereas if you look at a progression from an individual contributor to something else, in more of a Spotify-esque model, you're finding that people go to chapter lead, which is a people leader role, or they typically go for a work lead type role, which is a product owner or something on those lines. So the roles are quite different. You don't necessarily own both work and people, whereas if you look at a traditional organization, you own work, people, and budget, right? So it's quite a different way of re-envisaging how the organization works.
So, because I guess the structure is changing quite a lot, with the Agile revolution. So, do you feel like it's almost like people need to change their mindset about their career progression?
I think that's a really good thought. I think, if you're looking at the physical structures of the organization and how they're quite different, the way they envisage progress is very, very different, right? So again, the traditional is climbing the so-called ladder and the corporate ladder, and that's where that expression sort of ties in really nicely. Whereas if you think about the Spotify model, and again, it's just an example of one of the types of org structures you can use, it is very much based it's designed around a Swedish music company. And if you think about the culture that they have, the reason, and let me give an example, some of the language they use is designed around their culture. So one of the examples I give is they talk about guilds. Now, guilds is a reflection of guilds that occur in Europe. And what happens is that if you become working with wood, or you're a blacksmith, one of those types of things, you become an apprentice, and over time become a senior apprentice. You've been a craftsperson, then you become a journeyman, and then you become a master craftsman, right? And you actually progress through layers and layers of skill acquisition, right? So if you're looking at something like a Spotify style model, right, progression typically is more around skill acquisition focus and being a rock star at what you do rather than hierarchical, right? And what we see is when we look at a lot of the US-based companies, and I'm not saying this is true with all of them, and there's obviously a difference between East Coast and West Coast and all that kind of good stuff, but certainly they tend to value people based on the ability to drive an impact on business outcomes than they do necessarily on hierarchy. Because one of the interesting concepts you have is that the more senior you become as a manager in a traditional organization, the less direct interaction you actually have with customers, right? And the less value creation work you actually do. Whereas as an individual contributor, you drive, if you're writing code, you are creating the value that a customer is going to use for your client and for your business. And as well, that is what's valued. So the valuation of what you do in terms of career progression is certainly very, very different, right? And if you look at the compensation that you typically get, touching on Shelvia's comment, yes, everyone's got to eat. But as you hone and build your craft, you get compensated accordingly, right? And at the end of the day, there has always been the argument is that there's no reason why you can't earn and get compensated well as an individual contributor if you're doing a knockout job versus someone that actually has to manage people to get paid more, right? Many senior tech people, go from really good at solving problems, really good at creating IT things, really good at fixing things, to then manage people, which is not actually an area of their interest, not particularly an area of their strength, but they do it because that's the only way they can progress. right?
Yeah, and I think it's such a common story, especially before
Mm-hmm.
then someone not even in IT, I guess it's in any industry, then someone good in their job and then get promoted to
Mm-hmm.
management role, and suddenly they're just not enjoying their job. But for them, it was just
Mm.
the only career progression available. Just take a management role.
Yeah, certainly the case. And I think if we look through Asia, where some of the case studies of agile organizations have gone, they've found that lots and lots of senior people, and I'm not picking on tech, but certainly senior technical people, have gone from managing budgets and leading people, which is your traditional structure, to solving the most complex technical problems for their business, and have actually gotten their hands dirty again, and their satisfaction has gone up, but their compensation remains the same because they're adding more value solving problems than they are anything else. Mm.
Yeah, and I really like your example of being a rock star and what you're actually already doing. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
the career progression is not necessarily about changing the title. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually about the skills, and I think that's the probably for me. I feel like that's a main shift in the mindset, and you're thinking about the agile organization. So it's about the skills, not about the titles. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like if you never work in an organization like this, it could be hard to get your head around, especially if you if you haven't worked in the IT industry, you're moving in the structure and you're like, how you guys operate like that.
Mm. Well, it's a monumental shift. I mean, I have interviewed and hired people in the past where the opening line they go, "Well, I'm an expert." I said, "So how do you know you're an expert?" And they go, "Well, I've done it for 20 years." I said, "Okay, that doesn't make you an expert." Like I've been eating pizzas for more than 20 years, but that doesn't make me an expert in pizza, right? What have you done to? Oh, well, I deliver stuff. Sure, I eat pizza. Like, help me understand what have you done to tell me to showcase and to demonstrate that you are certainly out and above and you're outperforming, and that makes you good at what you do. Because at the end of the day, and I'll misquote one of my old quotes, is that so well I've got experience and I've got a mindset, and I keep saying to people, well, if agile, if it was all just about mindset, right? Then we'd all have six packs and all be millionaires, right? But we know that's not it, right? And there's no difference between losing weight and building a six pack as it is to building and driving a career forwards, right? You've got to do what no one else is willing to do in terms of putting the work in to drive the outcome. Mm.
100%, Peter. And I just want to go back to a few comments we're receiving here. So we already mentioned, Shelby is saying hi, loving the question on compensation and agreeing with Peter's point that while it's all elements, everyone got to eat. So guys, I'm actually wondering, whoever is listening to us at the moment, I haven't really asked you a question. What is progression? What is career progression for you? Yeah, so what it means for you to progress in your career. So if you can give us your opinion, would be great as well. And Arun is saying, agile person is organizational structure. How do you put forward a case for higher remuneration? If you are a programmer, customer success role, you are solving a problem or making money for the business. Business just thinks you are doing your best. How do you prove you are worth more?
Look, I think that's a difficult one, and we all have that as a key challenge. I think that if you can link what you do to some sort of business outcome or some sort of business problem, then in many cases, then that suggests, that there's a case to talk about value, right? I think, the second observation I sort of make is that whilst I appreciate that you're solving a problem or making money to the business and you're working hard, I guess the secondary question is what are you doing differently to your peers to make you stand up and above about, where you stand. And I think I actually find personally I find this quite difficult. And I know that when you look at trying to look at human performance on either technical work or management work or leadership work is really, really hard. But how do you showcase and demonstrate that you are a knockout performer and therefore deserve something out of step with everybody else? And I think that's a really tough one. How do you do it in a way that doesn't, play the politics and stab people and, and deliberately set things up so they can't be successful. How do you set it up so that everybody wins, be first among equals? Yeah, and I think it's about, are you solving the most complex problems in your area? Are you genuinely linking what you do, and you can tie a clear link between what you do and making money for the business? And I think if you can do that, then I think that's where the conversation starts, right? Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's certainly putting a start. And I think in a lot of cases, one of the challenges we have certainly in tech is that lots of parts of the business don't actually understand the impact that technology has, or the life cycle cost has, on the actual overrunning of their business. And I think that's something that's worth flagging and thinking about pretty firmly.
And I guess my question would be also, how do you I don't know, draft your career in Agile? Yeah, so we were talking about it, maybe before it was quite then you're entering an organization, you have some sort of career path, you're climbing the ladder. But what do you advise? How you can, start drafting your career path when you work in an Agile organization?
I think it's really tough, right? Because even if we think about that Spotify-esque structure, there are no clearly defined leaps and hierarchies and stands that you can sort of step up and across, right? And I think if I took back to the conversation we had, Arun, I think there's two parts to it. One is that I think you're going to find something that you're particularly fascinated about, some problem you're fascinated in solving, or some skill that you're particularly going, I'm really interested in learning more about X, right? I'm really interested in doing more about X or Y, right? And it's one of these things is, as you do more, you get better at it. As you get better at it, you get rewards and recognition for it. And as you get better, and then that builds this sort of flywheel, if you like, or momentum behind what you do, right? And I think that if you keep pursuing stuff that interests you, right, that you can be good at, and it happens to align to solving, as we touched upon with Arun, either particularly hairy business problems or particularly profitable opportunities, or creating profitable opportunities for the business you're in, then I think that's where the two ideally come together. Mm-hmm.
I guess, sometimes could be also tricky. You're really passionate about something. You want to, learn more of the skill, but maybe it's not something that organization need, or maybe, there is another, your 10 colleagues want to be experts, in the same field. So,
Mm-hmm.
How, I don't know, how would you navigate in this situation?
I think it's a really tough one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If I'm interested in learning to speak French and our business doesn't have an office in France, then sure. Hope they have an office in Belgium or even in Canada. But if that doesn't happen, then you're going to have to do it on your own time, because at the end of the day, we work during the day. Well, we work for businesses to drive outcomes on behalf of the shareholders that pay us money. So you kind of got to do what works for them, as well as what works for you. And I think that's where the negotiation is, around how do you drive and maximize value for all parties. And when you hit that sweet spot, that's when you typically, in my mind, that's when things typically go. If you keep busting and working terribly hard to get something to happen and it never happens, maybe it's not meant to be, right? I don't think these things are supposed to be painful. I think these things are one of those things that you just need to, you got to keep pursuing and doing, and things will happen, right? Because I think it's easy for people to support those who have momentum than those who are saying, well, just give something to me because I'm special. Yeah, but, so is every graduate that's walked out the door, right?
And I guess, would you recommend completing some sort of qualifications? Maybe, you mentioned that maybe, someone need to do something in their own time.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that there's any particular qualification that kind of maybe universal and help you in general progressing in the career with Agile organization? Or would you recommend something?
That's a really good question. It's a really good challenge. I mean, I think it's one of these things that if you're working in IT or project management or Agile, and you are a professional, i.e., you get paid to do it, then if I was to look at an accountant, right, or an engineer, what would you expect? Or a doctor, even? You expect them to be a member of a professional organization. You expect them to complete professional development units every year as a minimum, right? And you expect them to spend a bunch of time continue to hone their craft because what they learned 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago at university has changed, right? So that's what is the minimum you would expect for someone to call themselves a professional, right? So when I interview project managers, I do ask, are you a member of a project management organization? And if not, I'd be interested to understand why, right? Because if the first course you've ever done in project management is 20 years ago and you haven't done anything since, you could be very good, but you may not be very good, and you may think you are, right? And I think the second aspect is there universal certification that sorts it? There is no one ring to rule them all, right? To quote Lord of the Rings. But certainly, don't think certification is the key. I think training is the key. So training is everything, certification is nothing. So if you tell me you know about Scrum, that's fine. Then expect the question to ask is, how do you know Scrum? Well, and the answer is, well, I've been on a Scrum training course. Well, that might happen. If you sort of turn around and go, oh, well, I've just, I follow the Agile principles. And I'm like, well, sure, I follow the Agile principles too when it comes, I follow the principles of diet, but I still don't have a six-pack, right? You've actually got to learn how these things work. You've actually got to go out and do the work, right? And if you want to be a highly paid professional, then you've got to expect to be, to have the skills to match. So how do you know your skills happen? So that means, let's talk about how many conferences you go to. Let's talk about the training courses you've been on. Let's talk about what you've learned and what you've applied. Let's talk about the outcomes. Let's talk about how you have shifted what you've applied, how you shifted the client's behavior or pattern or outcome, and then what you do differently as a result of that. So is there a single certification to progress? No, but a certification is probably a ticket to play, right? And in fact, I would expect most professionals have multiple certifications and multiple training courses. And, if you're not doing a training course a year, then, sure. But I can tell you right now, there's a whole bunch of other people out there that do at least one training course a year, that do go to at least one conference a year, and do go to a couple of meetups a month. And you're trying to compete against them, right?
Yeah, Michael saying, I totally agree. I'm a teacher, and what you're saying about being a professional is spot on. Yes, I guess it's similar to majority
Teachers
of the
have
industries.
exactly the same industry requirements on PDUs and learning, continual development and projects and research projects to stay current on the latest version and the best ways to impart knowledge. And, if you look at school curriculums over the years, they keep changing and evolving because they keep learning better ways to do stuff. So, yeah, teachers are another good example of an organization that keeps iterating and getting better at what they do. Well, Michael, it depends what you teach, I guess.
We hope you're not the English teacher, Michael.
But and I think that when I look at lots of organizations and I look at somewhere, and lots of people that we work with, so many of them just haven't gone out and done the work that I would have expected them to do. Most of them just haven't gone out to conferences. Oh, it's unusual to go to a conference. I have to go, maths, there you go. The only true language in the world. So that's okay, right? But so many people haven't gone on the courses. Now, conversely, just to be really clear, if you've done 3 or 4 courses in the last 6 months, I would truly question your ability to apply. All right? So I'm very, very clear about, if you do a course, I'd love to hear about what you learned from it, and more importantly, I'd love to hear how you've applied it, how you've used it, and what you've learned from it. And I think that's that pattern that you got to build out, and is that learning cycle that you build out. So if I look at people I know, as I said, when you're doing 1 to 2 courses a year, that's all very relevant to the type of work you're doing. If you're going through conferences that are related to your industry to grow the mind and broaden the mind, and if you continue to meet up to learn things and to get different perspectives, that's a fantastic. That means you're likely to be current in terms of knowledge and capabilities you have. Because when I look at Agile as an example, as we talk about, Agile was defined in 2001. So if you aren't certified and you don't know a form of Agile, then you're about 20 years behind the 8 ball, right? Keeping in mind that the way Agile was defined in 2001 is you had all these inverted commas legendary, well, they're now legendary. Back then, they're all experts in their fields on software delivery. So you talk about people who created XP, like Ken Beck. You've got people like Alistair Coburn. They've all done years of research about what makes successful projects and things like that. They've gone into stuff. You got, Alistair's Crystal Method. You've got people like Ken with Scrum. You got DSDM. You got all these techniques and methods have all gone in to come at 2000. So each one was a globally recognized software delivery method. And then the Agile was defined as a common values and principles that band them all together to make them successful. So if you really want to be brutal about it, a lot of this stuff has been around since the 90s, right? So do I think you need to be certified? I don't think it's necessary, but training is certainly a mandatory part of it. And if you are only going up to training that is driven by your employers, that's fantastic. But if you want to be where everyone else is, right? If you actually want to progress, you have to do one step more than everybody else. You have to work that little bit harder, be that more focused on outcomes, that more focused on training, that more focused on learning, and you've got to build it up. And to be fair, as someone who's been running Agile communities actively in Melbourne since about 2013, I can certainly say it gets easier. And sometimes, I absolutely go back to courses I've done before and listen and hear a completely new message and go, oh, gee, I haven't seen that, right? Or I've done one of the courses I joked 2.5 times, right? Because as I keep saying, every time I go into the course, I learn something different. I'm like, this is a completely different experience, right? But it just deepens your understanding as a craft and, builds that credibility as a practitioner, right? And I think you've got to keep doing it. The fact that you don't do, to take on Michael's point, just the fact you've done, derivatives once doesn't mean you're an expert. The only way to beat the exam is through repetition, right? You've got to do the exercises, you've got to do the theory, you've got to keep doing it, you've got to sit the exams, and then you get a good mark. That's how it works. And it's no different when you're trying to practice the craft that is in your Agile career.
We'll just go back to the comments for a second. Shelby is saying, oh, I feel like you're calling me out there, Peter, because I just recently had to ban myself from signing in for the courses.
Sylvia, I know it's phenomenal that you learn stuff and you've got this thirst for learning, because I keep saying to people, learning is wonderful, right? And learning stuff is amazing. Like, I'd love to learn more about fine art, right? I'm learning more about music now, but all those things are amazing, right? But the comment or observation I make is not all learning is important right now, right? And that comes back to Run's point earlier, just made, is that if you're doing a job as a Scrum Master, then doing a Scrum Master cert makes sense, and then you can then apply it straight away, and then you've got your 10% of what you do. Learning is made up of 70-20-10. Appreciate there's a limited scientific basis behind it, but because the numbers are too round, but this is how most learning people will think about it. 10% of your learning is formal learning in classroom, like a Scrum Master course. 20% is through mentoring, where you'll be working with, say, an Agile coach or someone more senior to you, and 70% of your learning is through stretch assignments, right? And much like when they talk about being world-class, it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. That works out to be 5 years of actively going and honing your craft, not doing it because not turning up and flipping an egg because let me take a sport example. It's not turning up and shooting hoops for an hour and that counts for an hour if you're playing basketball. It is lining up on the line, doing your jump shot, resetting. Jump shot, exactly. Vertical jump, same action, same thing 1,000 times. That's what deliberate practice is. Playing a game is not deliberate practice, right? So I think one of the favorite expressions I've heard about some of the tennis players that we see in the world class, they say the thing that makes them great tennis players is not that they love the game. They are glutton for the punishment of training, and that's the game is the least important part of the game because it's 0.5% of their time. The rest of the time is just training, right?
Yep. And Peter, I guess my question would be, so if we flip it from like another side, from an organizational point of view, yes. So obviously, we trying to progress in our career. We go and do some courses, and we need to practice, and we need to try to apply it. But maybe not every organization, will support us is applying some new learnings. So how how do you think that could be aligned? Yeah, so someone went and did some certification, or someone went to a conference, they come back, they're full of like new ideas, they want to apply it, they're ready to apply it, but just they don't have a chance to do it in the organization, because like there is kind of like they're busy, there is no space for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think the way I think about it is that very few organizations will say if there's a way they can do it cheaper, faster, better, there are very few organizations will say no, right? And this is why I keep saying learning has to be in context. And one of the examples I frequently use is that if I look at our friend in our, the amazing stuff that they do on the Olympics, right? And a couple of years ago, there was a American called Michael Phelps that won a ridiculous amount of awards, right? And if I said, well, I actually want to learn how to swim, so I'm going to copy Michael Phelps's training method, right? And it's like, well, no, aside from the fact I'm not 6 foot, however, or 7 foot and have giant feet, like it's really obvious that his training regime and what they need and what I need doesn't necessarily match up, right? So if I don't know really how to swim, I might start with doggy paddle and work my way up to swimming, free stroke, yada, 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 work my way through the list. So that makes all the sense in the world, right? And I think it's no different to organizations. Whilst it's wonderful to see amazing things in conferences, one of the questions I always ask is, so how did you get started? What was the first thing? So this is our environment. What did you do first to start getting us in that direction? And I think that it's too easy for us to go, oh, this is what Michael Phelps does, therefore this is what we got to do, versus actually to get to Michael Phelps, I've got to put on some gym shoes and walk out the door and get my walking every day, right? And it's about getting that balance structure right. And I think, so how do you go and get inspired at conferences and training, start to apply stuff? You got to apply stuff that's contextually relevant, that drives the outcomes for both you and your organization. And it's when those two Venn circles on the Venn diagram for that you get a really high and excellent result.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Peter. We have more comments here. Arun is saying, totally agree with application of the skills than just have a certification. And Shelby is saying, for me, progress in Agile career is an adventure in itself. I love getting to expand my exposure in various Agile implementation, different solution types, different company size, different domains, various level of integration, trying out different roles. More recently, I'm realizing that one of the better way to learn is to share and teach. Risky, but also more rewarding.
100% sure, yeah. And I think that it's until you learn, until you can teach it, you don't really know it, is how we often talk about as an Agile, in the Agile coaching space and the delivery space. But one of the comments I sort of make is that if you go back to the Swedish Spotify-esque model, right, and you've got your chapter lead, who's your people lead in guild and things like that, the role of your chapter lead, right, the role of the chapter lead is to help the people that, who are the chapter members become better at what they do. That means if I'm a Scrum Master, then I have to be able to coach people who are either aspiring or are Scrum Masters to be better at what they do, right? And if you think back to that guild concept, you have you got apprentices, you got apprentices, you got craftspeople, you got journeymen, and I'm sure I got the order wrong, all that to master craftsperson, right? And what happens is at each level, you coach and develop the level below you, right? And that's where your expertise becomes strengthened, right? So yeah, absolutely, Shelvia. If you've got that level of expertise, I'd love to think that each of our chapter leads that I deal with on a day-to-day basis can teach the full spectrum of skills to be an expert as a Scrum lead, project manager, whatever the case may be. But I appreciate that's a concept that's European, and I appreciate it's a level of depth of skill that most people in Australia probably don't necessarily have. Yeah. I think, I think more of us need to step out, learn more, try more, teach more, and share more, right? And maybe a few of you should come along to one of our meetups and share some stories and try and teach some skills, you know? Risky, but
just
definitely more
just a
rewarding.
reminder, yeah, about the meetup that
That's right.
Peter's running. That's a meetup group, Project Managers, leading and delivery change. So make sure to join this meetup group after this stream to follow Peter's monthly meetups. And I'm glad we mentioned a little bit about mentoring as well, because next Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. I will be talking with Johan, and we will be talking about how the ways of a mentor can boost your career potential in IT. And I guess it's, as we just mentioned, it's a go both ways. You actually can potentially boost your career by being a mentor and by having a mentor. So definitely join us next Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. to discuss this topic. We actually hitting a 40 minutes mark of our live stream. So, time to try to wrap things up. I know we can talk forever. I love talking. I like talking. Peter like talking. So, we can just sit here all evening and keep talking. But guys, if you have some final questions to Peter, please pop it in the comments now. So I guess we can still answer few questions from the audience. We kind of already touched on this question before, Peter, but Shelby is asking, what does progress in Agile career looks like for you, Peter? So I guess it's more personal question, not in general, but for you personally.
It looks fascinating, right? The more I learn, the more I realize there's stuff for me to learn. There's more stuff to do and more bridges to cross. So yeah, I think if you look at the shifting world and how things are moving, and more organizations are shifting the way they work to drive better and better outcomes. So those who are happy to get their hands dirty, those who are happy to do things, try different things, different companies' size and all that, it's pretty exciting to be out there, right? I think the second sort of observation for me about why I think it's exciting is that at the end of the day, the only truly sort of competitive advantage you have is about your speed of learning, right? So if you're not learning, you're not training, you're not doing stuff, you're going to fall behind. So the trick is to get ahead and stay ahead is to keep learning. So yeah, and it's much easier to set it up. Once it's hard to set up, but it's easy to keep going. Is how I'd say it. So yeah.
And you mentioned that the ability of learning, and one of the key skills to have to progress in a career. But I guess I want to ask you, if you will give me like top 3 from your perspective, from your personal perspective, what kind of I guess soft skills, we're not talking about any technical skills here, people need to have to be successful in their career in Agile organization. So what it would be?
I think that, and we've touched upon learning, so obviously that's right up there, but it's not just learning as informal, but it's about learning from recognizing that you can learn something from so many different people in so many different ways and so many sources, and that rich diversity and tapestry of thoughts that people have around you. So I think the ability to be open to listen so that you can then learn, I think is probably, your number one, your top skill. I think the second one, and this is probably a bit of a counter to that, having a reasonably good sense compass about what's important to learn right now versus what is important to learn later. Because certainly if I look at so many coaches that I work with over the last sort of 10 years, all the ones that are brand new into jump on, they do dozens of courses, they do this, do that. And what happens is they learn so many skills and pieces of knowledge and so many books. And much like martial arts, the way I frame it is they got all the moves, they got no kata. They don't know how to hang it all back on. So going back to an earlier piece is that having that compass about, what do I need to learn? And then once you've learned it, then how do I use it to embed it before taking the next piece, right? So I think those two skills about being open to learn, but also being really clear about what seems to add a lot of value to you right now, I think sort of makes a great deal of probably two sort of key things I'd wish on lots of people. I think there's probably a bunch of others around
Yep.
ability to work with people and all that kind of stuff, which are all soft skills in that they're soft but hard, in that they're hard to learn and hard to master. And yeah, you know,
And I
we're
guess
still a works in progress.
And I guess with like, we're coming back to this staying on top of the industry updates. And as you mentioned before, like, going to some training course, at least, once a year to complete something, and at the conference, being curious about what out there as well, in a way.
Yeah, I think if I look at, Shelvia's sort of, statement or comment, right, earlier, is that, getting exposure to various Agile implementations, solution types, company sizes, companies, domains, integrations, as well as different cultures and things like that. I mean, the fact that you can run an Agile project in one environment is great, but it'd be great if you could run it in multiple environments. I mean, you've got to build depth in your craft. You need the breadth and depth in expertise. And I think that only comes with lots of different varied experiences. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Peter. So I think we're gonna finish on this note. I usually ask also my guest to share their favorite quote. So do you have any favorite inspirational quote that they can share with the audience to finish up our today's live stream? Put you on the spot.
Look, that you did, actually.
You can think about it. You can think about it while I'm doing a quick announcement for those who,
I've got one. So
Okay,
I was very lucky to have. This is quite pertinent to Agile. So I've got lots of quotes, but this is the most relevant one I can think of. Is that I launched a conference called First Conference, talk about the first 2 years of the Agile journey, right? And one of the speakers we're lucky enough to have is a chap called Alistair Coburn, right? And Mr. Coburn is famous because he's one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, and he used to come to Australia quite a bit. And I've been really lucky to spend, attend his courses and learn an amazing amount from him, right? And one of my favorite, so this is the context, right? One of my favorite quotes is I remember he had the microphone and he stood on the podium, put his arm on the podium, and he said, "When we wrote the manifesto, this is not what we meant." And that's always stuck with me. So there you go.
Here we go. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining me tonight. So for everyone who comment and ask a question, thank you so much for participation. So if you enjoyed our discussion, please make sure to like this video. Come on, we're living in a digital world. Likes counts. So, and make sure, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, do so you can watch the replays as well. And if you haven't joined Peter's meetup group, make sure you done it as well. Agile project managers leading and delivering change. And also just quickly remind you that next week we're talking with Johan about the ways Mentor can boost your career potential in IT. And the week after, we're going to talk with Ankit on how to transition your career to a DevOps engineer. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Peter, for your time. And we'll see you next Wednesday. And of course, Shelby is saying thank you. Appreciate the insightful chat to wrap up the day. Thank you so much. And see you next time.
See you next time. Bye for now.